Lijepa je vidjeti toliko divni kolega iz različitih sektora ujedinjuju u naporima da se prava djece ostvare, zaštiti i promovišu. Ponosan sam što imam priliku da radim za svima vama. Izvinite, ali sada... Hvala vam puno, ali izvinite, sada želim da nastavim na engleskom. I am so happy to open this really important conference on violence against children today. We are not just opening a conference, we hope we are opening a national discussion about a really important theme that frankly affects us all in some way. As a United Nations human rights diplomat, I normally talk very formally about systemic reform, about treaties, and about global targets. But today I want to talk about love, about the love between parents and children, and the way that guides the physical, emotional, and cognitive development of every child, creating the people they become as adults, creating their successes and failures, and driving how they contribute to their family, their community, and their society. And this is because over the past few decades, recent science has taught us so much about how we develop as humans, in particular, three things. Firstly, the single most important thing in human development is the attachment between parent and child, most particularly in the first 1,000 days of life. There is nothing more than that will determine a human being's success throughout their life cycle. Secondly, that adverse childhood experiences, neglect, physical, emotional, sexual abuse, dysfunctional parenting in early childhood undermine that attachment. And as our esteemed guest, the wonderful Dr. Burke Harris, will present, often leads to much worse life outcomes in health, in education, in employment, but even in criminality and violence. There is an estimated long-term cost of violence and adversity against children that amounts to a conservative estimate 8% of global GDP annually. This is not a marginal issue affecting a tiny minority. 2/3 of children are affected by some form of adversity in childhood. Up to 40% of children are growing up with insecure, some degree of poor parental attachment. It is often passed from parent to child in an intergenerational cycle of humiliation, despair, and pain, with grave consequences for our society. And often, the parent doesn't even know the harm they are doing. They are simply repeating the mental model that comes from their own childhood. However, amidst all of this bad news, it is with a profound sense of hope and optimism that I share the third thing that we have learned from recent science and research. We can break the intergenerational cycle with simple health, education, and social protection interventions. And as Professor Gardner of Oxford University will show, by strengthening parental services, we can reduce adversity and violence in childhood at source. Even the most hard-nosed capitalistic economist will tell you there is no greater public investment that government can make than investment in early childhood, yielding on average a 17 euro return for every euro of public money invested. And indeed, there is a fast-growing belief that early childhood policy is as important as economic or defense policy in determining the long-term security and prosperity of any society. We will shortly have an interministerial pledge on the new draft strategy on prevention of violence against children, which will seek to expand some of the services I just mentioned. I would like to salute my colleagues, Deputy Prime Minister Perksa, Minister Purisic, Minister Hrapovic, Minister Sehevic, Minister Nudozic, and Minister Zenka, as well as the Ombudsman, for their leadership in developing this groundbreaking new strategy. I'd like to acknowledge the wonderful leadership of our colleagues from the EU in tackling this issue. And indeed, in preparing for this conference, I called the senior European Union focal point on child rights in Brussels, and I asked them who would they suggest to come and speak as a good example of a recent EU member state implementing fantastic strategies to protect children from violence. Without even a single breath of hesitation, they recommended Estonia, and we are so happy that Her Excellency Kaia Iva, Minister of Social Protection in Estonia, has taken the time from what I'm sure is a very busy schedule to join us here today. I would like to say Aita to you. Aita is thank you in Estonian, but I'm not going to elaborate because my Estonian language skills are even worse than my Montenegrin. On the subject of thank you, I would also like to thank our colleagues from Telenor, particularly Sandra Steiner for her support for this event, as well as the British Embassy, Yasmina from our own UNICEF Global Research Centre in Florence, and also Harvard Centre for Developing Child, who have partnered with the conference by providing some of the audiovisual materials that we will show during the course of the day. We are also very honoured to have Susan Bissell, the Director of the UN Global Partnership on Violence Against Children, a lifelong champion of child rights, who's joined us from New York. Through Global Sustainable Development Goals, countries, for the first time in history, will have specific, measurable targets to reduce violence against children. We are delighted to acknowledge, as Deputy Prime Minister Perksa said, that Montenegro will join this partnership. I want to take a moment to tell you a brief personal story. A couple of years ago, I did a public talk in Montenegro on adverse childhood experiences, and it was shared widely in the Montenegrin social media. Heartbreakingly, a few days after, I realized that my inbox of my email and social media inbox was becoming full with messages of Montenegrin adults who wanted to talk about their experience of adversity. The 25-year-old woman who had been serially sexually assaulted by a neighbor in childhood and had never told anybody about it, not even her single mother. The 30-year-old man who had been emotionally abused and tormented by his father as way back in childhood as he could remember, because he had convinced him that the child was guilty for the early death of his mother. What all of these people had in common was they didn't even have the words to explain what they'd been through to themselves, let alone those people closest to them. This, despite the fact that that pain had tormented their lives, dominated their emotions, and undermined their well-being well into adulthood. For their sake, and also to protect today's children and future generations, let us say here and now in Montenegro, as a society, that we will finally break the public taboo on violence and adversity by talking about it openly, so as much as we can. That we will endeavor with all of our hearts to create robust, interlocking services that prevent, reduce and mitigate the impact of adversity in childhood. And that we will build systems that will bring the full weight of the law down upon those who seek to exploit and harm children. I hope you will join us in making the invisible visible and creating a world, and particularly in Montenegro, fit for children. Zaustavimo nasilja. Hvala vam puno.